Hello, welcome back to YouTube Stock Portfolio. Today we got a really interesting topic about some companies that I think keep making crucial mistakes and are going to be in really big trouble in the future. Could be really cool to keep an eye on. But first, I want to talk about the company we bought last week. And as you can see, that was Microsoft. In 1 week, it has been up 1.72%, so that is really good for us, especially having bought it only a week ago. Remember how YouTube Stock Portfolio works. If you want me to buy a stock, all you gotta do is put it in the comments, and if it is the highest rated comment, that is the stock I will buy, no questions asked. Now let's see how the rest of our portfolio is doing. As you can see, it's up 1.8% in the week, 1.79, which is really good for our portfolio, except it's not. It's the worst week we've had. We've actually been up 10% the first week, 6% I believe the second week, and this is our lowest week. However, you really can't complain about green. 1.79% a week would be amazing, even if I could keep that. I do, however, feel like there's no way we can keep this green streak, and it'll probably end it pretty soon here. Anyway, let's get into the video. So today I wanted to talk about one sector that I think continuously makes mistake after mistake after mistake, and could be something like the next Kodak. So let's jump into it. Well, if you don't know, Kodak is famous now for one of the biggest business mistakes of all time. They ended up passing on the digital camera. They were a company that made and developed film. When the digital camera came along, actually invented by Kodak, Kodak kind of passed on it, thinking it would be a fad, and that led very quickly to Kodak's almost complete downfall, becoming almost non-existent, only having a few. I think I only know one subsidiary that they have left called Eastman Chemical, which is just a shell of its former self. And as you can see here, they filed for bankruptcy back in 2012. What if I told you that many mistakes, almost as thoughtless as the ones that Kodak made, are happening today in one particular sector in a very small group of companies? This group is plagued with issues. Not only do they have a myriad of different businesses that are going out of fashion and possibly won't be viable in the near future, they make frequent billion-dollar mistakes, recently saw new competitors, and are notorious for their terrible customer service. If that didn't tip you off, if you haven't figured it out yet, this group is in the communications services sector and is Verizon, AT&T, and Comcast. Now, while I do think some other companies kind of have some of the similar issues that these have, I think these are the epitome of these problems. And we're going to go over why I don't like them as investments and why I think they have a dark future as a group of companies. First, I want to talk about some of the acquisitions that these companies have made and why I think they're poor business decisions. So right here, we can see that Verizon owns Yahoo, and the other company I want to talk about that they own is right here, AOL. Now, you might be thinking, AOL, that's a weird company. What do they do? They're actually playing the digital advertising space, along with Yahoo. Yeah, the digital advertising space dominated by companies like Facebook, Google, all the other fangs. It's an extremely competitive space, and one I can't fathom why Verizon would want to get into. So another thing that Verizon got with its acquisition of Yahoo was Tumblr. Now, with Tumblr, you'd think this would be a great play that Verizon would have to get into the social media space. A great rounding out of their ad portfolio. Well, what did Verizon do? They went and destroyed Tumblr and ended up selling it for a mere $3 million. If you remember, a few years ago, Tumblr used to be listed up there with some of the biggest social media companies in the world, such as Facebook, Instagram, Reddit. But now, Verizon's selling it off for $3 million, a shell of what it was formerly worth. Verizon has this pattern of just destroying companies that it doesn't really understand. And that's what I think is happening with Yahoo and AOL, just on a slower scale. Because these companies aren't going to thrive under Verizon. They're in extremely competitive spaces. That's why I think this was a really poor business decision and really bad vision for this company. Next, let's move into, in my opinion, the best setup of all of these companies to do better into the future. So that is Comcast. Now, the companies that Comcast owns are, well, broadband companies, NBC, more broadband companies, DreamWorks, and a streaming service. Not that bad, not that big. Pretty smart investments. Comcast seems to be focusing on their core business of broadband and then also trying to branch out into some content and some streaming services. On top of that, NBC actually just released a streaming service called Peacock, so Comcast has even more feet in the streaming service game. Now, what I don't like about these traditional media companies, such as NBC or DreamWorks, is that the revenue kind of starts to go down once you have an extremely big entertainment network. With even companies like Netflix making their own stuff, it's kind of hard to get more and more people to watch your show or your movie. So I think these might be hurt in the future, but ultimately Comcast is really focusing on broadband. However, there is a new competitor in broadband in Google Fiber. Google Fiber is very, very slowly rolling out over the country, and they're offering really fast speeds. Well, so is Comcast. But the thing about Comcast is people hate Comcast. Comcast is notorious for being one of the world's most hated companies. So that means when people are signing up for internet and they see Comcast or Google, they choose Google because they don't trust Comcast. They don't like Comcast. I think that reputation can really hurt this company into the future. However, as I said, I think they're really focusing on their core business and not extending it to areas they don't understand. I think they're the best set up, but I think their reputation is going to really drag them down as Google Fiber starts to expand across the country and maybe even other internet services. Finally comes who I think is the worst of the bunch, AT&T. Now, who does AT&T own? Well, AT&T owns HBO, TBS, CNN, Turner, which has a bunch of these channels, DC, Warner Bros, New Line Cinema, and then there's a bunch of other stuff. Well, if you noticed, there were a ton of media and a ton of channels in there. So what would you think AT&T would want to do? You'd think maybe they want to diversify, and they do. They have their cell service, they have their broadband service. So what did AT&T buy in 2015 to help them with that? What did they think was the future? AT&T bought DirecTV. Yeah, the cable provider. A bad investment. They bought it for $67 billion, and they are already trying to sell it only 5 years later. Now, just to give you context, DirecTV is hemorrhaging subscribers at a rate that it'll pretty much have none left really, really soon and should have zero value. I'd be surprised if anyone picked up this DirecTV deal. It's basically Blockbuster, and AT&T jumped on it way too late. Now, if that doesn't tell you everything you need to know about the company of AT&T, I don't know what will. Somebody was able to ascend the ranks in AT&T and bought DirecTV. It's just a structure of incompetence. It's mind-boggling that would ever happen at a company. It was a terrible investment in 2015. It's a terrible investment now. That's why I think AT&T is in big, big trouble. They clearly have terrible, terrible leadership and a terrible, terrible structure that puts leadership in place. It makes really, really poor decisions. So even with this out of the way, thinking about their broadband networks, well, these companies, they do always have their broadband networks, and in a way, that's much more secure than just having a cell phone network, and their business is kind of always gonna be there. But I do want to point one thing out. Remember how these companies all have terrible customer service and pretty much everybody who has them hates them? Well, let's take a look at choices. So let's go somewhere in Northern Virginia. Just take a click. 3 providers, Comcast, Verizon. 2 terrible companies. 3 providers, Comcast, Verizon. Once again, companies that people don't like. So once Google Fiber comes along, what are people going to do? They've only had a choice of companies they absolutely hate giving their money to and dealing with. They're going to switch to Google Fiber. These companies have not made customers like them enough and have actually had negative brand loyalty. People hate them, and people want any reason to switch. So all it would take was a Google Fiber or another company coming out that had customer-friendly business practices, and all of a sudden, these companies start to lose footholds in their places where their broadband is. And that's why I'm very negative on these companies, and I don't like the idea of investing in them. Because while some bankruptcies happen really quick, like in the blink of an eye, like Enron, some happen really, really slow, like Kodak, with profits slowly eroding over many, many years until only a shell of their former selves is left. And that's what I think is a real possibility for this group. that was the video. Thanks for watching. Remember, if you want me to buy a stock, all you gotta do is put it in the comments down below. If it is the highest rated stock, that's the stock I will buy. Check back in next week to see what we buy, see how our portfolio did, and see if we keep up this amazing free streak.